This morning's scripture reading is from John chapter 20, verses 24 to 29, Jesus and Thomas. But Thomas, who is called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it on my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet come to believe."
So just to start off, we are re-recording the message today because we were having some difficulty with the sound, and if you started watching it, I think you only got about halfway through. So we are just going to re-record the sermon. So the church is empty, and it's just me up here, so keep that in mind. But this morning I'm starting a 3-part sermon series through the month of April. It's called P.S. You know how when you write a letter and then you sign off, and before you send it, you think of something else that you'd like to write? And so you add a P.S. P.S. I love you. P.S. I forgot to tell you I'm coming over to your place to stay for a few days. P.S. The check is in the mail. Do you know what one of the best P.S. notes ever written? Charles Dickens wrote a letter to an admirer of his, and at the end of the letter he wrote, P.S. Sorry if you can't read my handwriting, but it doesn't matter. I really don't have anything interesting to say. I'm not sure in our digital age if we use P.S. much anymore. If we're writing an email or composing a text, we just go back and add or delete from that message as we need. But back in the day, P.S. was a popular way of including what we had missed in a letter. Anyway, in our scripture reading, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, or what we celebrate on Easter, it said that there were 40 days before Jesus ascended into heaven, or what we celebrate on Ascension Sunday. And those 40 days were kind of like his P.S. moments. It was said that he appeared 3 different times to his followers. So for the next 3 weeks, I'm going to speak of each of these post-resurrection experiences, or P.S. moments. Once he appeared on the road to Emmaus. Once he appeared to his disciples on the beach. And then today I'm going to talk about the time that he appeared to the disciples right after the resurrection, and good old doubting Thomas boldly proclaimed, "I will not believe he is risen until I see and touch the wounds on his body," the story that Daniel just read. So let's get started. You know, one of the characters in the Bible that I sometimes think I feel the worst for is Thomas. I think history has not been kind to him. Thomas was a really good disciple and friend to Jesus. He was loyal. He was faithful. He did everything Jesus ever asked of him. Not only was he a good disciple while Jesus was alive, but even after the crucifixion and resurrection, he continued to be a really good and faithful servant. He continued to do the work that Jesus had started. In fact, it was said that he went to India, not only to share the gospel message, but to do some really good work in that place. And yet, despite it all, he goes down in history as doubting Thomas. Because for one moment in time, he succumbed to his doubts, and he said the quiet part out loud. He said what I'm guessing many people were thinking after Jesus' death. Come on, did he really rise from the dead? If you want me to believe that, you better give me some proof. And from that moment on, he became known as Doubting Thomas. Despite the fact that he got the proof he was looking for and went on to do great things, history forever tagged him as Doubting Thomas. That never sat well with me. After all, Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times during the crucifixion to save his own neck, but for the rest of his life, he wasn't known as denying Peter. So I feel badly for Thomas, but I'm also kind of a big fan of his, because Thomas gives us an opportunity to talk about the role of doubt in our life of faith. And that can be a very powerful discussion. And that's what I want to talk about for the next few minutes, doubt and faith. We all have doubts about things. Some we will express, and some we might keep to ourselves. The word doubt comes from a Latin word that means of two minds, and that's exactly what doubt feels like. You know, we may have seen the end of winter. Well, we may not. Maybe the Blue Jays are going to win the World Series. Based on what we've seen so far, maybe they won't. To doubt is to be of two minds. It is to question. It is to wonder. A husband and wife who worked for a circus went to an adoption agency. The social worker there raised doubts about their suitability as parents. So the couple produced photos of their 50-foot motorhome, which was clean and well-maintained, with a beautiful nursery inside. The social worker, though, still had doubts, for example, about the child's education. What kind of education would a child receive in this couple's care? Well, they said, we've arranged for a full-time tutor who will teach our child all the usual subjects, with French and Mandarin and computer skills. The social worker liked that, but then continued to have doubts and questioned about a child being raised in a circus environment. Oh, they said, don't worry about that. Our nanny will be a certified expert in pediatric care and welfare and nutrition. Well, the social worker was finally satisfied. She said, okay, what age child are you hoping to adopt? Oh, it doesn't really matter, they said, as long as the kid fits in the canon. You know, I think to doubt is for the most part healthy. Doubting can refine our thinking. It can keep us from getting too carried away. It can give us options of thought, and it can hold us accountable. The philosopher René Descartes once wrote, doubt is the beginning of wisdom. Doubt is a part of life out there, but the question is, does it belong in here? Last Sunday was a great Sunday here as we celebrated Easter. I don't remember the last time that our church was so full. And I know there's lots of reasons people come to church on Easter Sunday. The music, the community, the sense of nostalgia. For some of our young people, maybe they're back from school and they come out to the church for that Sunday. But also, like Christmas, there's something about our faith story that draws us in at Easter. For those of us who particularly grew up in the church, there's something fascinating about Jesus' birth and something fascinating about Jesus' death. It's why they're the two biggest worship events of the year. We celebrate the bookends of Jesus' life. So put the birth aside for a moment and focus on the death of Jesus. There's some fascination around that, but also some confusion. We know the facts surrounding his death, his crucifixion on the cross. Many of us know the traditional or orthodox theology that's developed around the crucifixion, something like he died for the sins of the world, even if we're not quite sure what that means. But let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered, like doubting Thomas, did it really happen? Did Jesus really rise from the dead? And is it okay to wonder that? What if we divided the church here today into three? And I asked everyone who is skeptical of the physical resurrection of Jesus' body, if it actually happened, that he came back to life from the dead, if they were skeptical, sit on this part of the church. And everyone who was absolutely certain the resurrection happened, sit on that side of the church. And everyone who was on the fence, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, sit in the middle. Where would you sit? I don't believe. I completely believe. I'm not too sure. Here's another question. Those over on this side of the church, those who are ready to proclaim, yes, it happened. Of course it happened. How do you respond to the people sitting on this side of the church? If we did this little experiment, I think I would have a pretty good idea of what might happen. This side would be fairly full. The resurrection is the heart of our faith. We believe it, we don't question it. I'm thinking the middle section would probably have quite a few people in it. I believe, I think. I've never seen a body come back from the dead, but the Bible says so, so I guess it happened. I think it happened. I'm not sure. What about this side? Likely this side of the church would be empty. Do you know why I think this side of the church would be empty? Partly because if you don't believe in the literal resurrection, you've probably been told or told yourself that you don't belong in a church, or you're not welcome in church. Church is for believers only, so you're probably not even here in the first place. But even if you are here today, and you're thinking to yourself, I actually belong over there. If you're thinking, I love this church, I love this community, I love what Jesus stood for, I love to sing the hymns, I love coffee hour, but I'm not sure I can buy the resurrection, you still won't sit here. The reason being, because you're afraid of what those people sitting over there will think of you, or what the guy in the pulpit will think of you. If that's the case, and I bet I'm right, how sad that is. I hope I can make the case over the next few minutes that the church, our faith, needs these people. We need our doubters, our questioners, our skeptics, as much as we need our enthusiastic believers. Not only should these people be welcome to attend church, they should be encouraged to attend church. Let me try to explain what I mean without possibly losing my job. Before I get into this specifically, let me talk about the importance of doubt itself. And I want to do that for a moment by talking about Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. We all know the rhyme. Here's the question. What does Humpty Dumpty look like? My guess is almost everybody would say it looks like this picture. Why do you think this? Because we say Humpty Dumpty is an egg. Everyone knows that. It's just the way it's always been. Humpty Dumpty was an egg that fell off the wall and cracked open. That's just the way it is. Show me in the rhyme where it says that Humpty Dumpty was an egg. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. There is no egg in that story. There's never been an egg, and there never will be an egg. We've just heard something so many times, we don't question. It has calcified itself as truth, even though it is not. Do you know the actual story behind Humpty Dumpty, according to history? Humpty Dumpty, it was said, was a giant cannon used by the British in the Civil War back in the 1600s. It was stationed on a wall outside the city or surrounding the city of Colchester. In June of 1648, it was the last line of defense against the rebels who were trying to take control of the city from the royalists. Knowing they couldn't knock out the cannon, they instead used their artillery to knock out the wall underneath it. As a result, the cannon fell, broke into pieces, and all the king's forces couldn't put it back together again, and the city was taken. Try telling that version of the story to your kids or grandkids. So how did it become an egg? We don't know. No one knows. But no one questions it. It's just the way it is. Obviously, Humpty Dumpty was an egg sitting on a wall. Well, it's not. It's funny how we accept things as they are just because we've heard them enough times that it sounds like unquestioned truth. So again, putting aside the church stuff today, let me talk more about doubt in general. It's easy sometimes, isn't it, just to accept what we've always thought and always believed about anything, to never question it. It's as if to question it is to threaten somebody. To question is to risk standing alone. To question is to open ourselves up to criticism. How easy it is to stay quiet and just kind of go along with everything. And so, like Humpty Dumpty, we blindly accept what we have been taught, never considering another way. And yet, think about this. Every great invention, every great movement of change, every great shift in the status quo began by someone having the courage to say, I'm not going to go along with that. The car would never have come to be if somebody hadn't said there's a more efficient way to get around than a horse. Nothing changes until somebody has the audacity and courage to first doubt and then question and then create something new. That's part of having vision. Or think about this story. In the late 19th century, there was a convention of bishops of the Methodist Church in the United States. One bishop boldly declared, "The day is coming when human beings will take flight. Mark my words," he said, "one day there will be crafts that will fly through the air, transporting people here and there." There was a buzz around the hall. Is this bishop crazy? What a bold thing to say, especially from a bishop. Finally, one of the bishops in the room stood up with a loud voice, shouted the bishop down. "What heresy," he said. "Flight is only reserved for the angels. If God had wanted us to fly, he would have given us wings." With that, he stormed out of the building along with half of the other bishops. Do you know who that bishop was? His name was Bishop Milton Wright. Do you know the names of Bishop Wright's sons? Orville and Wilbur, the pioneers of flight. Thankfully, they dared to doubt and question their father's orthodox beliefs, and so now we have the airplane. If you think about it, almost everything we have and enjoy in our modern world came about because someone dared to question the status quo. Someone dared to think outside of the box. Someone dared to feed their doubts and see where it took them. And we owe those people a debt of gratitude. So here's my question this morning. Why is the quality that we admire so much out there so feared in here? Why do we make doubting out there a noble pursuit, but in here it's a sin? And by in here, I don't mean Northwest Barrie, I mean the church in general. Because let's face it, the church hasn't exactly embraced those who dare to question its orthodox beliefs. Just ask Galileo, the philosopher, astronomer who dared to suggest or question the idea that the sun revolved around the earth and not the other way around. In 1623, he published his findings in a book called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems, in which he said the sun, and not the earth, was at the center of the solar system. He was dragged before the church councils, forced to recant his ideas. He was stripped of his ability to further study and teach, and he was sentenced to the rest of his life to house arrest, all for claiming what we know today to be absolutely true. The earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around. The point is, if you dare to question out there, you're a hero. You're an entrepreneur. You're a visionary. If you dare to question things in here, you are labeled a heretic, and you are shunned like doubting Thomas. I think that's a shame, because surely the freedom to doubt is a right that we have wherever we are, even in church. The poet Alfred Lord Tennyson once wrote, "There lives more faith in honest doubt, believe me, than in half the creeds." I think there's truth in that, and yet we don't value our doubters in the church. I was having dinner a while ago with a group of people, some of whom I knew and some who I didn't know. And I found myself sitting beside someone, and when he discovered what I did for a living, wanted to tell me why he has no time for the church. I thought, oh yay, here we go. Anyway, he'd grown up in the church. He'd grown up in Quebec and attended the Catholic Church. He also went to a Catholic school led by the nuns and the priests. He said his parents were religious. His grandparents were super religious. He said he was taught this and taught that, and he was told what to believe. He said, I didn't really believe half of it, but I was scared to say anything. And then he said in university, he started reading about Jesus for himself. Not what the priests and nuns told him about him, but about the historical Jesus, the person of Jesus. He said, I was suddenly reading about this man who was an agitator, a troublemaker, a justice seeker, a visionary, a passionate, fired up person who wanted change, who taught about loving your neighbor, helping the needy, and questioning authority. He said, I couldn't square this Jesus with the one that I had been taught, so I stopped believing, and I never set foot in a church again. He said to me, why doesn't the church tell us about this Jesus? Because that's a Jesus I could get behind. And I listened to him, and I listened to his passion and his energy and his excitement, and I thought to myself, how sad that energy is being used against the church. Imagine if that energy and that passion was being used on behalf of the church, on behalf of the church which is still to create a better world through empowering people to live their best lives. So let me get to the resurrection. And I know this is where I get on shaky ground. I'm not trying to offend anyone. But I think what is interesting about the Christian faith and about the church is we've made the resurrection the litmus test of our faith. We've said in the past, what makes you a Christian is if you believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus from the dead. If you believe it, you're in. You're a Christian. If you don't, you're not a real Christian. There are plenty of churches, including right here in Barrie, that will tell you that. In fact, I bet most of them will tell you that. That's the line in the sand. In other words, if you're on this side of the church, you're out. And if you're in the middle of the church, you better migrate over to that side pretty quickly. To me, that's the wrong metric. To me, we've just shoved out of the doors the people like that gentleman that I shared dinner with. Some of the very people that this church needs. The visionaries, the agitators, the questioners, the passionate justice seekers, those who will go into the world and try and love their neighbor and work towards peace and feed the hungry. Those who will define their faith not just by what they think and believe, but by what they're doing to make real Jesus' vision for a better world. We need those people here. We should make them feel welcomed and wanted. I'll be honest with you. As a minister, I would much rather have a congregation filled with people who might have questions about the resurrection of Jesus and yet are passionate about his message, who are out there every day doing the work of their faith, encouraging people and helping people and displaying goodness and kindness and grace, than a church filled with people who believe the right way, but who also believe that believing is enough and are doing precious little to make theirs or other lives better. If that is heresy, then I'm a Christian heretic. Because this world would be a better place if it was filled with people acting like Jesus, instead of those preoccupied with defining or defending him. Now, all that being said, I do have to address the other part of the story of doubting Thomas. Because after Jesus appeared and showed Thomas the wounds on his hands, and by the way, please note, Jesus did not condemn Thomas for having doubts. He graciously gave him the proof that he was looking for. But then Jesus said, according to the story, "You have seen me and believed, but blessed are those who never see me and yet who still believe." In other words, Jesus didn't condemn Thomas for his doubts, but in the end, he kind of gave him a nudge and said, it's okay not to have all the answers. You can still believe without having proof. And perhaps that's where the true message of the church lies, in the tension between doubt and faith. I absolutely believe that churches should welcome and embrace their doubting Thomases, those who are willing to question orthodoxy and question ideas and practices within the church, because they stimulate thinking, they expand the boundaries of vision, they keep Jesus' message fresh, and most importantly, they keep us all accountable. We all know that the church has done some horrible things in the past when it becomes so convinced of its rightness or its righteousness, when it thinks that it has a stranglehold on the truth. Just ask the survivors of residential schools. We all have a right and responsibility to question orthodoxy, especially when that orthodoxy mistreats or excludes others. But that doesn't mean that the church should stop promoting faith as a goal within itself. Jesus affirmed doubting Thomas, but still pushed him to not become so needy of the facts, so needy of proof, that he misses the beauty of faith itself. Blessed are those who have not seen, but still believe. I love my doubting Thomases in church, those who question and push the boundaries, but I also love those who don't feel a need to do that, who don't let their doubts keep them from walking in faith day by day. My goodness, we need them here too. You know, we live in a world that requires us to have faith every day, whether we think about it or not. We don't have all the answers, and if we needed proof for everything, we would never get anywhere. For example, I have no clue how someone living in Australia can snap me a picture and within a millisecond it can appear on my phone. I have no idea how that happens. But does it stop me from embracing it? No. I have no idea how concrete beams that weigh hundreds and thousands of pounds can span across a roadway dozens of feet apart, not only not fall on the cars below, but actually allow cars to travel on top of them. Bridges fascinate me. I have no clue how they work. But does it stop me from going under them or over them? No. Every day we live by faith, whether we call it that or not. We are wired for faith. So why is faith in God such a difficult leap? Maybe it's not. I have an incredibly strong faith in God, not because the church tells me to, but because butterflies instinctively know how to migrate from Barrie to Mexico and land in the same spot every year. I have an incredibly strong faith in God, not just because I went to Sunday school and learned all the stories, but because within the human stories that I see every day, I hear about incredible moments of resilience, courage, love, and hope. I have a strong faith in God, not because God speaks to me in a loud voice and shows me the way, but because when I'm still and quiet and really, really listen, God whispers deep in here. I have a really strong faith in God because when I resist the urge to become cynical and instead stay open to wonder and beauty, I feel the Spirit move within me. There's that old expression that seeing is believing. Well, sometimes believing is seeing. Sometimes believing comes first. And that's what Jesus said to Thomas. I find that when I walk through this life in faith, the world opens up to me so much more beauty and goodness. And I do see God in my neighbor. And I do see God in the burst of spring. And I do see God in acts of love and justice. And the resurrection comes to life for me in a very real way. Blessed are those who don't see and yet still believe. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. Fear is the opposite of faith. Doubt is a companion of faith, sometimes allowing us to shed the beliefs and ideas that are actually keeping us from the fullness of God's Spirit and God's love. Doubt doesn't have to threaten faith. It can actually refine it, bring us back again to the vision that Jesus had for life, of an impassioned, enthusiastic, compassionate community of believers committed to being their best and doing their best, that the light of God may shine ever brighter in this world. Amen. P.S. I don't care where you sit in this church. I'm just glad that you are here.